Nomine Patris et Filii Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum, benedicta tu mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus.
Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostre. Amen.
In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Brethren in Christ, laudetur Jesus Christus. In secula.
In secula. Good morning, my friend.
Good morning. Good day. I'm joined by co-host Kennedy Hall. How you doing, Kennedy?
I'm wonderful. I love this time of the day.
Excellent. Yes, we're wonderful. Here we are at Farmer's Hours.
Yes,
on the Eastern time zone. And my name is Timothy Flanders, and this is the Meaning of Catholic. We're here today. Welcome to the 16th week after Pentecost. Mm-hmm. A wonderful gospel we had yesterday. All those who exalt themselves will be humbled. All those who humble themselves will be exalted.
Yeah.
A beautiful lesson in humility from our Lord to begin this wonderful week of saints. We have a great week. And a quick note, because last week we talked about the Embertide, and I found out later that there's actually there was one of the reforms in 1960 is actually reforming the way that September Sundays are counted. So Embertide always happens the third week of September. But in the old calendar, so before 1955, there was a reform in 1955, if you're not aware, with the Holy Week and other things. So the 1962 Missal counts the Sundays of September differently than they did in the old calendar. So what they do is they say the first Sunday of September is actually the first calendar Sunday of September, which kind of makes sense. But before it actually sometimes went into August. So the last Sunday of August counted as the first Sunday of September. So that's why last week was Embertide. To me, that was actually, I was reading off of my tan calendar, which is a great calendar, by the way. You ever want to take a look at it, because and we'll talk about that with St. Padre Pio this week. It actually incorporates all the new feasts, puts all the new feasts and the old feasts on one calendar. So you can actually see the difference. But on the tan calendar, it actually has Embertide last week, which is interesting, which is the older form. Right. But the new form, which is what most people are probably following in the trad world, is actually this week. So this week is Embertide for most people. So that's a fasting and penance Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday. And that's a commemoration of the grape harvest, I believe.
And what are the norms? What should we be telling people for the norms for those fasting days?
Well, they're holy days of opportunity. So remember that there are actually no laws on the book obliging you to fast. Okay, so do not.
There's no pain of mortal sin.
No pain of mortal sin. This is up to you. But according to my tan calendar, it is partial abstinence on Wednesday and Saturday, and then full abstinence on Friday.
Right.
So what does it even translate to?
It means like no one meal you could have some meat, but at the collations throughout the day you wouldn't have any, essentially.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. So you could have the main meal Wednesday, Saturday, you can have meat. But on Friday you can't.
Yeah. And then it's days of fasting, so you'd want to have small little snacks basically a couple times a day, and then one meal. So
one full
meal. Have a reduction in your calories.
Right.
And
Excellent. Yes. So some other great saints today. So today is St. Matthew, Apostle.
Yes.
The divine office always switches to the office of the apostles on Apostles' days, and it's very big office. So it's a great day. St. Matthew, also evangelist, writer of the Gospel. Yep. We also have tomorrow. We have St. Thomas Villanova, and I don't know much about St. Thomas Villanova, but he's quite large in the Spanish Church in the 16th century. St. Alphonsus Liguori quotes him heavily in his sermons. And then on Wednesday, the luminous saint of the 20th century, St. Padre Pio.
Yeah.
So obviously he only shows up on the new calendar because he died in 68, I believe. Mm-hmm. So he was after the 1962 Mass even was codified. So St. Padre Pio is on Wednesday, and then we have Our Lady of Ransom, a great tradition of anti-slave trade among the Mohammedans, who were really the slave traders for centuries before the Christians debauched themselves into that practice. But on Saturday, feasts that Kennedy and I have a great devotion to, these saints in North America, which are the great martyr Jesuits of North America, St. Isaac Jogues John de Brebeuf and companions.
And
Can you tell us anything about? Tell us about, especially our non-American viewers, which, in fact, most of our viewers at this time live are non-American. So,
right.
Hello to our non-American brethren, or non-North American. You're Canadian, obviously, but can you tell us about that, Kennedy? These saints, Saint Isaac and Saint John.
Well, we like to call them the Canadian martyrs in Canada, and America like to call them the American martyrs. But in reality,
actually, we call them the North American martyrs.
Okay, but in reality, they're really the French martyrs.
There you go.
So pour tous les Français qui voient cette vidéo, ce sont des Français. But they're from France. They're Jesuits. I write about them in the second chapter of my book, actually.
Oh yeah.
To me, they're a wonderful example of how there's no salvation outside the church. Because just as a little, and I apologize. I'm gonna get Saint Isaac Jogues and Saint John de Brebeuf. I'm gonna get their stories mixed, okay? Because they both went through two separate things. But I'm blanking right at this moment who was what. Okay. But so essentially they had come over to what would basically be Eastern Ontario or upstate New York, around the Great Lakes. Okay, so this is where the Iroquois were, the Algonquin, the Huron tribes, all in that area. And for people, unbeknownst to people, most of Canada and the northern parts of the United States were relatively unpopulated when the French came over, because the French were here previously, prior to the English. If it wasn't for the Battle of the Plains of Abraham in Quebec, we'd be speaking French all over. I mean, Canada would be a Catholic country, I guess. Well, actually, Quebec's not Catholic anymore, so who knows? But you know what I'm saying. But that was Charles Coulomb. Hopefully we can get him on one day to talk about that. But the amount of conflicts that France was in around the world at that time, and all on the side of the good guy for the most part, the conflicts that they were in really stretched them thin. So they ended up losing that battle. But in any case, the Franciscans had come over first, and they had encountered a country in Canada that they estimate 100 to 200,000 people in the whole place. I mean, and if you knew how big Canada is, it's bigger than the United States as far as general land. Probably livable land is less vast because the north is so unlivable in some parts. But Canada's massive. Okay, my city has 35,000 people, and Canada is 33 times the size of Italy. Let's put it that way. So the amount of land that was available was astonishing. So you could go months without seeing a single person, you know. So most of the people in Canada lived around the water, because that's where you live. And around the water, obviously it's cold, but you have a milder transition to certain seasons. So you have a longer growing season and not as much frost and so on and so forth. So anyway, the Franciscans had come before. They hadn't really had much success, little tiny settlements here and there. The Jesuits made their way over on behalf of the King of France and all that. Isaac Jogues and John de Brebeuf, they had an unsuccessful first voyage. They were here for a little while, went amongst the Algonquin, I believe, for a little while, northeastern Ontario, and just kind of went back. Anyway, they ended up coming back a little while later. Things were a little bit more settled. Things were moving along a little bit more in North America, and they had some really good success. So the Huron tribes, if I'm not mistaken, were actually pretty amenable to the French Jesuits. Eventually, though, they lived with them, they wintered with them. So anyone who thinks that these, you know, this is sort of like the Spanish thing. Anyone thinks that these so-called, you know, colonizers were against the native peoples. It's the opposite. I mean, they literally came and lived with them, learned their language, wrote catechisms in it. And actually, the first things that they would tell them the basic truths of, you know, there's a God, there's a devil. Your soul goes one way or the other way, depending on how you live. And that was just, it piqued their ears. They're like, well, of course that makes sense to us. Please tell us more, you know? And they had a pretty good thing going, to be honest. But then after a certain amount of time, the Iroquois tribe mainly got a little bit violent. And one thing we have to remember about paganism is that, you know, Chesterton talks about it in Everlasting Man, which is my favorite book. And even though paganism ultimately is non-Christian and there's no belief in the one true God in the truest sense of the word, Chesterton always says you look at history and you have your sort of warmer paganism and you have your more diabolical paganism, you know? So you got your sort of Italian countryside and the gods of the forest, and okay, it's not correct, but it's not child sacrifice. And then you have your cults of Baal and Hannibal and stuff. So in any case, the Iroquois were a little bit more diabolical in that sense. They really went down that path. And when they caught wind of what was happening and people were starting to convert, a diabolical rage overtook a bunch of them basically. And they did things to the martyrs that were basically unspeakable. I believe St. Isaac Jogues, at one point they actually bit off his index and part of his thumb and index finger before they ended up killing him. So for a time he was living without these fingers. He actually got a special dispensation from, I believe it was Pope Urban II. I might be wrong on that, but it was an Urban, if I'm not mistaken, to celebrate Mass, because he didn't have the Mass fingers. Okay, because in the old Mass you only use your index and your thumb, but the Pope said that it'd be, basically I'm paraphrasing, but something like it'd be absurd for a man who has shed his blood to not share in the blood of Christ. Right. So yeah. It's beautiful. So I don't know how he did it. I guess something like this or whatever, but you can see pictures like of him like this with his hands, and they're bitten off at the front. So anyway, comes time, they're going to get martyred. Eventually, they ended up basically tomahawking, caving the head in of Isaac Jogues, I believe. And unless I'm making that up.
Well, before I want to just describe some of his glories as a martyr. He was, so they took him. So the Iroquois, my understanding is that the Huron were the ones that really responded to the gospel. They translated everything to Huron. They were making a Huron grammar, and that was something that the Franciscans failed to do. They were just not as adept to the language as the Jesuits, and the Jesuits were able to learn the language a lot better and thus make inroads with the gospel. But then, so the Iroquois were especially they were one of the matrilineal tribes, and this is something that feminists celebrate, because the feminists don't understand what's going on, because the reason there's a matrilineal line, and what I mean by that is that it's kind of asserted as a matriarchy, because your progeny is traced through your mother, matrilinear in the Iroquois. But the reason that was because there was so much promiscuity. Yes, so many people. There was so many breakdown completely of marriage that you couldn't even tell who the father was. There was no way to even tell. That's why you had to do that in the Iroquois. So the Iroquois were just debauched, pagan, demon worshiping Indians, savages, versus the Huron were much more, this is the difference between Indian tribes. I mean, there are the very savage Indian tribes, and then there are the much more, these sort of stereotypical peaceful tribes, which they do exist, Yeah. But then the Iroquois, so they capture St. Isaac, and they mock him with burning, boiling water, mockery of baptism. Yeah. He continues to preach to them, though. And he continues to, while he's in captive, he's comforting, baptizing others. He's hearing confessions, and he's preaching to them. And so they said, well, we got to cut out his tongue. So they cut out his tongue because he's just completely a perfect martyr. He's the perfect martyr. He's continuing to preach. They're just astonished that they can't kill him. They continue to torture him. They're biting off his fingers, pulling out his nails, all unspeakable tortures. Then they cut out his heart while he's alive, and they eat his heart because they want to gain his amazing strength that he just displayed in his glorious martyrdom. So he really has a glorious martyrdom. You should really look it up and read it in detail, because it is truly glorious, worthy of the saints of old, of the martyrs during the early church. So, I love that his story of really conquering and converting these demon worshipers to Christ by his great fortitude.
So I guess Isaac Jogues was the one who went through the prolonged torture, and then Jean de Brébeuf, I think him and his companions they were tomahawked, I believe, and it was all within a short amount of time, one another. But then you also hear these stories of basically the persecutors being converted by the way that they witnessed through their martyrdom. And in fact, you know what, in Canada today, amongst a lot of the First Nations tribes, there are a lot of devout Catholics who have an especially strong devotion to the rosary. And they really do. It's sad, the story of First Nations people in Canada, for the obvious reasons of, the conflict, whatever, but a lot of it too, because amongst themselves, they're a very divided group, where some of them really are really super devout, pious Christians. And then a lot of them have been exploited by the sort of left-wing politics of using them as their pets, which is just what they love to do on the left, is use minorities as their pets. So, but they have there are glorious traditions of Catholic Native peoples in Canada. And, yeah. So just like the States too. I mean, especially
the Catholic. There's Catholic. Shout out to anyone listening who is from any Native American tribe who's Catholic. They're definitely out there, and there's a strong tradition of that, but it gets obscured by these Marxist, these people who prey on them and prey on their culture to try to exploit them into their Marxist cause. And so it's very sad and very unfortunate. But which brings us really to our topic today, which is an aspect of manliness, which is very important, which is defending the weak against evil men. Mm-hmm. And this is something that we've really witnessed in our current situation with the COVID-1984 lockdown. Yeah. And this is one of the very important themes of Kennedy's book, which we were going to announce the title of at this show. Kennedy, tell us the title of the book and a little bit about it.
Terror of Demons?
No, your new book.
Oh, sorry.
The new book. This is going to be released October 7th for Our Lady of Victory.
Yes, it's going to be called Family Be Damned. So a little bit of play on words there. Basically, we're going to follow a family through the lockdown. Okay, it's a fiction. It's not a nonfiction like my last book. And we follow a family through the lockdown and after. Okay, I thought the lockdown was a good literary device to use for hardships that are befalling the family, because obviously there's been financial hardship. People have been scared, and people have been thrust home to live with each other, which most people don't know how to do because we don't do that anymore. We send our kids off to school very young, or daycare, or whatever. Both parents tend to work. And before you know it, you've got kids that have grown up and you didn't know how they became the way they became. So this is sort of catching a family in the middle of that. So it's set with a classic North American family, 2 children, 2 parents, both work, this, that, and the other thing. And they come home through the lockdown. And then we go through a series of correspondence between some devils. And they talk about how they're going to damn this family. It's a lot of themes are covered in it. Some of the contemporary things that I thought were relevant to dive into a little bit longer, I go into that. But really it goes through what is it like, especially in a family where the father is not, where the father is struggling, okay? And then we watch 4 members of the family. We do go into their journeys, but most specifically, we follow the father and probably the son the most, a little bit with the mother. And we follow them through the journey, and we see the ups and downs. I hope that I'm able in the book to have a little bit of an emotional roller coaster for the reader. I think I do. And we follow them through this journey. I won't give away how it ends, but basically we're looking at the strategies of how the devils try to damn the family. And it is funny, actually, as a book. There's some sort of dark humor in it. I'm writing it from the perspective of the devils, so that was weirdly fun. So maybe that's a problem. Maybe I should confess that. I'm just kidding. And then, there you go. I think that's a good synopsis.
Yeah, you'll laugh, you'll cry. We'll just put it that way.
I hope so.
It's a great book. You'll love it. I really am happy that I can publish this as Our Lady of Victory Press, Kennedy's second book. It really is a gem. It's Kennedy's writing is it's very good writing. He has a very Chestertonian flair with his own spice. And
thank you.
If you've read Terror of Demons, you know that he can really pack a punch and with good writing. So take a look at that. That'll be coming out very soon. October 7 is the release date. We can't promise exactly maybe that date, but it'll be around there. So anyway, so the protection of the weak. So I want to give us a little bit of overview survey history to bring us to the point that we're at.
Right.
And this is something that a book that I've referenced before, Families Without Fathers by Pope Noe, which is a sociological book. It's secular. It's not even Christian per se. I don't even know if he is a Christian, but he basically just observes that the every single culture has had marriage as a fundamental societal right, except for certain societies that are purely demonic, like Iroquois, like we just discussed. Certain societies like the Canaanites have had this destruction, but there has been this very strong natural institution of marriage. And particularly, it is an institution for men for the sake of women and children. And the reason is because women have a biological connection with their children, and it's a very strong instinct of a mother towards their child. Very strong instinct that's simply biological, whereas men do not have the same biological connection to their children because they do not carry them in a womb. They beget the children, and they come out of their mother. And now in Roman times, the father, the child was born, and then the child was placed on the ground, and then the father decided whether or not he wanted to leave the child and let the child die, or take up the child and accept the child as his own. And this is something that shows the need for marriage as a cultural piece, which civilizes men. Because if men don't have marriage, they're not biologically connected to their wife and children, and they are not strongly forced into this role that they should take up.
Yeah.
So there was always this institution of marriage, but as I mentioned with Roman times, it was also corrupted in various ways. And even among the Jews, polygamy was permitted. Divorce was permitted. And we see that the indissoluble bond of marriage, which Christianity gives, just purely on a natural level, is a lifelong security provision for women and children. And there's really no government agency has ever been able to replicate what indissoluble marriage does for a wife and children. It provides them with lifelong security from a man who's providing for them. Period. I mean, it's just look at it from a purely secular perspective. There's really nothing that can compare to this.
No, and
yeah.
Well, Ben Shapiro, obviously everyone knows who he is. One of his montage of highlights from talking on campuses and things. He's making a pro-life position at some university campus, and a young woman who's clearly, fitting the bill of the third wave feminist type, whatever, is getting all upset. And she has the microphone and she says, well, I would consider the pro-life if you would, there needs to be some sort of, how can you say that the woman has to have her child if there's not some sort of government institution that makes men raise their kids? And Ben just goes, it's called marriage, and the left ruined it. Congratulations. He's like, it's awesome. You should try it.
Yeah.
But made me think a couple things when you were saying that. There's one other book that's really good. I haven't read the whole thing. I read the beginnings of it. It's called Men and Marriage by George Gilder. He is the guy who started the Discovery Institute, which is about intelligent design. It's an interesting institute. It's a pretty good book. He goes through, he's a Christian of some sort, but he's just smart. And he goes through, he actually starts the book kind of talking about, makes up a myth almost. He talks about, this prince who finds this damsel and whatever. And then he compares that to how that would be in the modern day. And anyway, it's interesting. But we see that in the Bible, though, what you say about how basically marriage is a godly institution. It's one man. It's Adam and Eve. It's it's the way that we were created. The family was the point of human existence. It's the form that we live in order to develop and have union with God and to be sanctified and all that. And you see with Abraham, really, I mean, I think that's the first place in the Bible where you actually see polygamy permitted amongst the Jews. Or they weren't really Jews yet, I guess, in the classic sense. Because I mean, with Noah, you just hear of Noah and his wife. Adam has Eve, and then she dies. He has another wife.
I think there might be a few. Well, maybe it's in the unrighteous line. I think Lamech, the bad Lamech, does it. Yeah. But I think he's in the unrighteous line. But yeah, I don't know offhand if it's.
I'm thinking just in the sort of.
I think it is Abraham. Yeah,
I think it is. And Chesterton talks about it. It might be an Everlasting Man when he talks about marriage, but he says, you have the impression when Abraham consents to this sort of concubinage sort of marriage thing with Hagar that he loses something in doing so. It's like it's an unholy concession to a fallen world, basically. And we see that early on in the Bible. And then when Christ comes, he obviously says, in the beginning, it was not so. When he's talking about these deviations in marriage, divorce is something that has been permitted because of the hardness of heart. But in the beginning, it is not so. And same with polygamy and so on and so forth. And evolution has been one of the biggest scourges on the sanctity of marriage, because we love to do this stupid thing. I love this, eh? Well, not animals are monogamous. People compare themselves to animals. I'm like, with all due respect, you want to compare yourself to a chimpanzee. Well, you should eat your neighbor's babies, for one, because they do that when they're at war, and then you should throw your feces at each other, right? They do that as well. Would you like to start slinging your, So some animals are monogamous and some are not, but they're animals. They're not rational. Okay, so stop comparing yourself to them. But in the human race, especially created by God, as per Vatican I and Fourth Lateran Council, marriage is a union between one man and one woman, and it is sanctified from the very beginning.
Right. So, so this is an institution that civilizes men, and this is the problem of men. Cultures throughout the world have understood that there's a problem with men that needs to be solved by culture.
Yeah.
And not only marriage, but they also have rites of passages, which are something that you do to 15-year-old boys, which is where you basically beat them up until you toughen them up, and you point all of their aggression towards the enemies of the village and all of their aggression towards defending the weak and the children. And you point all of this culturally into something good, so that the problem of men can be solved, because people just understand men are aggressive, they're promiscuous, they have all these bad traits sort of naturally in a fallen world. In a fallen world, they just become these monsters, basically. So men need to have this strong cultural momentum, which points them in the proper direction. This is, again, understood by all culture, not all, like we talked about Iroquois and used depraved cultures and whatnot, Aztecs, but many, many different cultures have understood that there's a problem with men and it needs to be solved by a strong cultural institution.
Yeah.
And so the Christian church not created this, but given to us by God. And this is something that was used by the church to civilize my ancestors. And this is going to be the difference between Kennedy and myself. Kennedy, do you have any Northern European ancestry at all? Or is it all Italian and civilized?
The name Hall is from Scotland.
Oh, okay. Okay. Great. Oh, good. You got the Scots. Very good. Yeah. That's perfect. Okay. Well, my name is Flanders, and this is the Flanders flag right here. This is the county of Flanders, the rampant lion. Shout out to my Flemish brethren across the pond. But my ancestors were the Picts and the Frisians and all sorts of barbarian tribes who were basically street rapists. They just came into town, destroyed your village, raped your women, took off everybody into slavery, and that was my ancestors. They were complete barbarians. Whereas in the South, in the Roman civilization, the Italians, they were much more civilized. But like we said, they still had their own debauchery. But what the church did, what they preached, the gospel of Christ to these pagan barbarians, and they used a thing called chivalry to convert these street rapist barbarians into knights in shining armor.
Yeah, literally.
And this is one of the greatest cultural revolutions, I think, in the whole history of the world. Really taking these not only my ancestors, but the Northmen, the Vikings, who were even worse.
They were insane.
And these just pure barbarians into knights in shining armor. And the way they did that is because they had the institution of marriage, and they had this chivalrous code, which basically modeled on Christ himself and his manliness, into using all of the aggression and all of the violence and all of this masculine tendency in us into a defense of the weak, using those things for the defense of the weak, the fighting of the enemy. And the greatest glory, of course, is the glory of the Crusades, when Pope Urban II called upon our fathers to go and defend the Holy Land from the Mohammedans. And you had hundreds and hundreds of our fathers leaving their wives and their children to go die in a battle for the sake of the weak and the helpless. Yeah. It really is the glory of our fathers. Just to think of that, just kiss your wife and children goodbye. You're going to go face certain death to defend the weak and the helpless, to defend Christendom for the sake of the gospel, for the sake of Jesus Christ.
Well, and the main motivation for why the Crusades finally began in the way that we know them. There were sort of smaller crusades before that, if you think about defending Europe against invasion, whatever. But was the pilgrims, right? The pilgrims, those who were going on pilgrimage to the Holy Land, were being exploited by the, whatever, criminals, whatever. And therefore that was like, hey, you can't do that to innocent people. This is one thing when we think about our ancestors, obviously for great TV and movies and books and things, we like to focus on the juicier parts. So when you read about the Viking Age or, the Middle Ages or so on and so forth, you read about a lot of battles. Okay. So you have this impression that these people must have been constantly at war. But it's really the opposite. There definitely were long periods where various cultures were in conflict with one another and certain things happened. But war did not happen in the past the way that it happens now. You would have a battle on a day, almost like a game that was scheduled. There would be a kickoff, with the shaking of hands or the negotiation between the two heads of state or whoever were there. And there'd be a decision whether to go through with it or not. And when the battle was done, the battle was done. This idea that you would have this prolonged mechanistic, warring for years at a time, it wasn't possible. You just couldn't do that because it was all based on manpower and the mobilization of peoples and things, and you couldn't do it on the air, and it was just a different thing. So, even amongst cultures that were hostile towards one another, for those traveling through, there was actually a relative amount of peace. So what really ticked off the Christians was, hey, you're going to the Holy Land, and these innocent peoples who are not declaring battles on you for whatever reasons we've decided, they're being exploited, killed, whatever, taken into slavery and so on. So what you were saying about the Norse tribes being civilized, it really is, we like to glorify the Vikings a little bit. And, on a human level, I understand there's like the Roman Empire and stuff, there's sort of a grandiosity and excellence. If you look at some of the, achievements of these various peoples, it's nothing wrong with looking at, oh, wow, they had great ships and, interesting ways of doing things. And there is like a lot of, even in Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis, when the devil is teaching the younger devil about, he basically says there's even virtue in soldiers on the wrong side, because where would they be without their courage to go into battle, right? That's fine. We admire those things in people. The Vikings, it was a debauch. If you actually think about what it would be like to put yourself in a culture where it was, they were doing things like they were known for doing psychedelic drugs on their ways into battles and things, the various mushrooms and whatever. It was insane. It was the complete, if you actually look at what it would be like to go on to a sort of Viking colony and see what would happen to someone they were taking over, it is the most diabolical thing you could ever imagine. So the fact that they became Christians and that just all went away is remarkable. It's one of the greatest proofs for the existence of God is when you know somebody who lived a life of total debauchery, and then within basically an instant, somehow everything is completely. I actually know a guy who I haven't seen him in a while, but he's a total partier, major partier in his late teens, early 20s. So, and he was Portuguese, I think, in his background. Somehow just sort of found God, had this major conversion. And his dad ended up sort of coming back to the faith and becoming a devout Catholic because he couldn't believe what happened to his son. There was no arguments that had to be made. He watched his son and he's like, you were going out and you had 20 girlfriends last month, and now you're going to mass on a Friday night and you're nicer to me. What is going on? And it's kind of you see that en masse with the Viking culture becoming Christian.
Yeah, I love what Superior Reality. Shout out to an American cop.
Oh, cool.
Thank you for your service. He says, I think all men, however, without being submissive to a higher calling, naturally revert to their fallen nature. I think that is an excellent point, because that's really what men need. Men need God to show them to submit to something more powerful than them, because this is the reality, is that men are stronger than women and children, period. People, Marxists who want to deny that, just deny reality. But because we're stronger, we need something yet more stronger to make us submit, and make all of our fallen tendencies submit to an order where we can use the strength that we do have for good.
Yeah.
And I want to just bring it up to COVID because the glories of Christendom begin to be reversed by the Protestant revolt. And they find that really the doctrine of marriage is not really present in the New Testament as a whole body of doctrine. It's really not explained in the New Testament. It's just sort of mentioned in passing. Yeah. And so the the so-called reformers immediately are starting to allow polygamy. Henry VIII divorces his wife. He marries another. He's committed adultery. Yeah. Luther allows his prince protector commits bigamy. He marries 2 women. The radical reformers just do outright but debauchery. Luther is trafficking in nuns, and all of his so-called priest friends are getting married. It's a complete debauchery, and you see this in the beginning of the Reformation, which does not get discussed, but it's a very strongly sexualized movement, which is a very strong motivator for people to join this new so-called evangelical movement in order to cast off all these restrictions of the church. And that's why Council of Trent comes in with booming anathemas, anathematizing all those who attack marriage. And there isn't an anathema against polygamy. Why do you think that was? Because the people were practicing polygamy. And that's all we really have in this modern age is basically polygamy. It's serial polygamy, where you go from one to another and you divorce and remarry. But basically this brings us to our modern era, because this is just the breakdown of the family. It begins with the revolt, Protestant Luther's revolt. It accelerates with the American and French revolutions, which is a destruction of the hierarchy of values, the hierarchy of society. And almost immediately in America, within a couple generations, there's a massive feminist convention in 1848, which is beginning to destroy the basic fundamental patriarchy. Because patriarchy, what we're talking about, patriarchy, true patriarchy is good. But what had happened with these Protestants is that it had morphed into a tyranny. It had gone from true patriarchy of Christendom, which is manliness, monogamy,
service,
breaking into the English Henry VIII, the tyranny of men, so that now men become these tyrants over their wives. Yeah. So the women are now reacting against that. They're reacting against it justly, because these men are tyrants, polygamists. And so then it revolts into the feminism, and the rest is history to a certain extent. I mean, so we get to this point where in the 20th century, there's a complete breakdown. All these divorce is allowed now. You can legally divorce. Before that, you couldn't legally divorce. It wasn't allowed, against the law. You can't just divorce and remarry against the law. And then just the breakdown of the family has finally come to the point in the past few generations where the children have been completely exposed now, because ultimately the demons want the children. They want to break apart the family. And this is something that Kennedy goes about in his book, Family Be Damned, coming out soon. Yeah. The demons want the children, and in order to do that, they have to break apart the family, and they need to feminize the father. They need to make the woman into a feminist, if possible, and then they break apart the family, and then they can get to the children, because they hate the children because they're innocent and they are consumed with envy because they're going to take their place. In they're destined for heaven. So now we have our modern society, which is completely cast off children. We're literally we're either murdering the children in utero, or we're just doing experiments on children by marrying gay people together and putting children with them. Let's do an experiment on the children, see what happens when they don't have a father or they don't have a mother and they have just dad and dad or mom and mom. Let's do an experiment. Let's experiment on the children to see what it looks like when mom and dad divorce. Let's see what happens. And a wealth of modern secular studies confirms that this is just destructive to children. It's destructive to their lives having this divorce, because divorce, ultimately, children understand divorce as a rejection of them, because they self-identify with mother and father. They self-identify that their identity is their mother and their father, which is obvious for obvious reasons. So when their own father rejects their mother or vice versa, they cannot help but understand that as some sort of a rejection of themselves. And this is something that tears them apart and hurts their lives. Yeah,
we're witnessing now. We're in the Bible. I don't know if everyone's read the whole Bible. Read the whole Bible, and we're seeing now what happened. See, I should back up. So the natural state of man is not. Well, the natural state of fallen man is not atheist, as people think. This is what people think. You're either going to be Christian or you're going to be atheist. No, the natural state of fallen man. So I guess the unnatural state of man, if you want to put it that way, because of our fallen nature, is pagan. This is why you have the one true God. You have the union of with the one true God, with Adam and Eve created in image and likeness and all that sort of thing. And then you see a devolution of the human race from there as sin proliferates into the world. And you see God having to wipe things out and make a new covenant and that sort of thing, right? With Noah. And so you go through the Bible and you keep seeing that. You see these prophets, these great heroes, these patriarchs like David, but then, they just fall a little bit into this paganism. And then his son falls even deeper. And you have Solomon. And by the time he dies, some church fathers say that he was damned. I mean, I don't know. But because, by the end of his reign, I mean, and it's always attached to infidelity. It's always attached to adultery and that sort of thing. And even the original sin is a type of infidelity because it's a lust for something that's unholy, because it's this attractive fruit that is pleasing to the eyes, but they reconcile a mortal sin because they want to commit it anyway and whatever. Anyway, so we're seeing now the cult of Baal, the cult of Moloch on full display. See, we now live in a society of child sacrifice. And metaphorically, sure. Yes, there's symbolic child sacrifice. I know that we're not, there's not like a pagan Aztec temple where they're, sacrificing the innocents for all to see. But abortion is, a rite of passage in many cases. But just on the things that are seen, because that's invisible to most people, but the things that are seen, children are sacrificed. What should we do with the kids? Well, we're going to try this new initiative in the schools. Is it going to work? We'll see. Think about that for a sec. We're playing with the minds of kids. It's not that schools are bad. Obviously, there are good schools. But this idea that we could engineer a way for them to think, and we could actually give it a trial and error about how they're going to turn out, what this shows is that we have no concept of the Christian anthropology of the human person anymore. It's gone. We don't have it at all in our society. Why? Because the Christian anthropology is that the soul is the form of the body. So healthy soul, healthy mind, healthy soul, positive in, positive out, that sort of thing. You can't just, you can't have any internal peace, internal quiet, anything, if your mind is not at rest. And your mind will not be at rest with bad education, with bad ideas, with sinfulness, with reconciliation of sinful activities, which is instantiated in so many of our institutions today. And also, we see this with the lockdown. One of the things that's been so hard for us has been the way that small children have been treated during this lockdown. And people say, what are you talking about? No, we're not protecting the kids. The kids don't get sick from this. This is ridiculous. We're doing something that hasn't happened in this sort of sense since the times of the tribes of Moloch. Okay, where we take children and we sacrifice them for the prosperity of our society. That's what we're doing right now. Who are the victims of this thing? Take it at its face value. I don't, everyone knows what I think. I don't believe in the hype, but let's just take it at its hype. Here in Canada, for example, it's like 85% of the victims have been from nursing homes. Okay, and that's sad and everything, but nursing homes are full of old, sick people. That's where something like that's going to happen. Any bad contagion is going to rip through a nursing home. There hasn't been a single death of a child in a country of 40 million people, except for one kid who had like 4th stage leukemia or something. And even the article that came out said it wasn't actually from the virus. Anyway, the point is what we have done to kids, okay, for better or for worse, schools for a lot of them are a place of refuge. A lot of them are from bad homes and they go to schools where they have teachers who kind of treat them well. They have, a reprieve from the domestic abuse. They have services that are trying to help them, We took children in my country weren't allowed to go to playgrounds until the end of June. People were playing golf in the middle of April, but children couldn't go to playgrounds. There's no evidence they could get sick. Children now, if they want to go do dance classes and things like that, they have to wear masks and stand 6 feet apart when they're 7 years old. Children are shoved into their classroom, sitting 6 feet apart with bubbles of plastic in some places around them. We're treating children like specimens, and we're going to do whatever we want with them. Because why? Because it's good to sacrifice all of their innocence, all of their creativity, all of their ingenuity, all of their purity, and everything good and childlike about them, so that we might have some sort of, success in the society with our health. It's demonic. It is completely demonic. It is the cult of Moloch. And we're seeing this now with this judge, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Rest in peace. I hope to God she had a deathbed conversion. We take no joy in someone dying in that state. Okay,
right.
But people are going to riot within probably the next 2 days or something.
Yes,
when they suggest a judge. Why? It's about abortion. People were in the streets singing, John, what's the name? Not John Lennon, the other one. Was it John Lennon? The singer, Imagine There's No Heaven, that song.
Yeah, John Lennon, yeah.
Okay. Ironically singing a song, Imagine There's No Heaven. Maybe that's a consolation for women that die. But why? What is she good for, Ruth Bader Ginsburg? She was a champion of abortion. That was it. She, that was the main thing, is she was a champion of abortion. People are losing it because one of their saints of abortion is dead. And now you're going to see probably mini civil wars. You're probably going to see domestic conflict where actual blood will be shed on the streets at the prospect of somebody coming in who loves children. We are living through the cult of Moloch. Sorry, I'm fired up. Go on.
Yeah. Any Catholic Christian man of God should be burning with anger at the insane injustice against children. It is absolutely unconscionable. It is a terrible injustice, an offense against God. The little ones, the children are trying, children's biggest concern is to be safe.
Yeah. And
one of the biggest safety features of life for children is a routine, something that's normal, something that's ordered, that they can expect what's going to happen. The earliest child development is understanding cause and effect. When a 1-year-old infant cries and mother is there.
Yeah.
And that's the most basic cognitive development in their brain, that they understand cause and effect. And one of the biggest things is that when they ask for help, they get help from mom and dad, or they can expect that during this routine at this time, something will happen and I'll be able to do this. But completely disrupting their whole world is attacking them and attacking their well-being, hurting their psychological development as children, forcing them into these irrational things with all these masks. It's completely irrational. It's such an attack on children. And every man of God should be enraged by this injustice against children. It is terrible. These playgrounds.
Yeah.
It makes me so angry. These playgrounds.
We have in our, like, there's a reason we're under chastisement. Okay, we kind of deserve it, but we have our she-devil in charge of our health, our Fauci, Dr. Tam, on record, talking about how strangers, whoever, should consensually have their, fornication, whatever. Talking about, I won't even mention because it's disgusting, but just on national TV saying things you should do. Basically, we're at the point now where kids can't go to a playground. I mean, they can now, but that'll probably change soon. I don't know. So you can go to a playground, can't go to a playground. But the national health people in charge are saying, if you are dating, so, I mean, think about just from a virus perspective. Little children who can't get sick, playing on a playground outside. And, I talked to some guy who actually works in a lab, he does that sort of stuff. And he said, the idea that viruses could live on steel, it's like, out in the elements. He's like, it's ridiculous. Like, just from a microbiological perspective, he's like, it's an absurd idea. It's just dumb. That's one of the things that tipped him off that this thing was a little bit hoaxy, at least the reaction to it. Cause he's a science guy. And he's going, what are they saying? You can't, he's like, this is ridiculous. Anyway. And then here in Ontario, the splash pads opened before the playgrounds. So here we are at a park at one point with our kids in the middle of June. And I'm glad they were at the splash pad. It was fun. But the park is 100 feet. Like, the playground is 100 feet. And we're like, you can't go there. Water is a breeding ground for life. I mean, it's the most disgusting thing. You're reusing water going through. I mean, there's chlorine, sure. But let's be honest, it's full of germs. But these people in charge are talking about how people should fornicate during the pandemic. And they're not talking about married couples who are in their own bubble or whatever. They're just talking about people who are going to hook up. And the recommendations that have come out from the British Columbia CDC, they have images and pictures. They're so disgusting. They're talking, and it's like, I won't even go. People look it up. I don't want to say it. Look it up. British Columbia CDC, recommend. You'll find it. It is completely. It's like a demonic troll, a farce. It's almost like they're playing tricks on us. But they're recommending that during a time where apparently coming together to hug your mother is going to kill her. But strangers should come together. whilst children are locked in their homes. The amount of child abuse that is going on right now. There's a video going around. There's a bunch of them, but there was a kid. He's about 7 years old or so, and he's in a store, right? And his mask falls under his nose. The kid starts freaking out, screaming, "I'm going to die. I'm going to die. I'm going to die." His mom just puts the mask up over his nose, and he's like, "Oh, I'm safe." The amount of perhaps irreparable psychological abuse that has been done to that young child because he's been tricked into believing that there's some airborne contagion, that if he doesn't breathe through a diaper, that he's going to somehow die. It is unconscionable what they have done to these kids. Shame on them.
Shame on them. Absolutely. This is terrible sin, a terrible sin that cries to heaven, because
yes,
God loves the little children. God loves these little children. If you scandalize the little ones, one of the harshest rebukes of our Lord Jesus Christ is against those who scandalize the little ones. And that's just scandalizing them, making them fall. Scandal is an occasion for another person's spiritual ruin. So doing something that hurts the little ones, hurts the children in some way. It would have been better for them if they had a millstone tied around their neck and thrown into the sea.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So the punishment that our Lord Jesus Christ is going to mete out on those who hurt the children is going to be worse than being drowned. It's going to be worse than being drowned for eternity.
With a 2,000-pound rock. A millstone is about 2,000 pounds. It weighs about 1 metric ton, a little more. This
is what should make all men of God burning with anger and ready for action, because right now we're facing the second lockdown that's coming
in some way,
for the second wave, whatever it is. Now, we've talked about this on this channel. The data that is there shows that COVID-19 84 or COVID-19 as a virus, as a disease, does have it can have a deadly effect on the vulnerable, those who have comorbidities, those who are elderly. It can have a very deadly effect on them, but ultimately it affects most of the population who is affected is not adversely affected. They simply get the virus and they pass it along or whatever. They don't have any symptoms. Most of the people are asymptomatic. There's really no data that exists, to my knowledge, that shows that this virus is any worse than the flu, except for the fact that there's no vaccine, that we haven't quite understood everything. But the effect of the virus is so minimal compared to the reaction to the virus.
Yeah.
And the reaction has become much worse, far worse than the disease.
It's insane. I just read a statistic from England. Okay. England's got some stuff going on because their lockdown has been, we're very lucky in Canada in the sense because we're parliamentary sort of democracy, sort of parliamentary monarchy thing. But because we have the proximity to you guys, we adopted a sort of constitution, which other Commonwealth countries don't have to the same degree, which is why you're seeing this insanity in Australia. I was like, why is that happening? They don't have, like, you guys have a Bill of Rights. We have a Charter of Rights. They don't have that sort of thing in the same way we do. And we're kind of lucky from our American neighbors that we adopted something like that because we still have some relative protections. That's why our protesters, there's protests all over Canada. There hasn't been a single arrest or anything, unless they're doing something illegal because it's a charter right and freedom to assemble, that kind of thing. But in any case, in England, it's been insane. So there's a lot of really good stuff coming out there. A lot of people are starting to get upset and good. Even now, some Oxford scientists and things are coming out saying this is ridiculous. And I just read a statistic yesterday from an article in the Daily Mail. So right now, the total daily death, all-cause deaths, okay, that's what you want to look at. That's the thing that matters because it's like whatever we think about this thing, are more people dying or not? You know, if it's a plague, then more people are going to die.
Yeah, it's not a case-demic.
Yeah, it's just, are you dying or not? And this is measured in the same period. Okay, this was some late August, September, somewhere around there. In that period, it was 11 people per day, roughly, were dying. It was 11 per day, 11 per week, but whatever it was, were dying from Rona. But 124 people in that same period, out of that same all-cause death, were dying from the flu and pneumonia. That's 10 times. So as per their official statistics coming out of the NHS, okay, there was 10 times as many people dying from complications due to just flu and pneumonia than from coronavirus. So in that instance, you have evidence saying for them in England in that 2-week period or 1 month period, whatever it was, that the flu and pneumonia during non-flu season, this is late summer, was 10 times as deadly as coronavirus. That's not conspiracy. That's from the NHS.
Right. So what we need to do here, we got 5 minutes left. Any questions or comments, please provide them. I know Superior was mentioning about the demonic reality of the lockdowns. I think there's definitely demonic elements because, like we just talked about, people, the lockdown mechanisms are basically serving the demonic. The priorities of the lockdown are serving the demonic because they show their cards. Let's shut down all the churches and tell people how to fornicate. I mean, that's just pure demonic activity, you know. Yep. So they show their cards, they show their what's essential and what's not essential by what they put into law, and they put it exactly. But what we need to be preparing for right now is the second lockdown. We need to be organizing as men, talking to your parish community, your neighborhood, figuring out what you're going to do so that your children can continue to have a normal life. Your children can continue to have this. I think we need to look at civil disobedience here at this point.
We should do a full show on this.
Yeah. We will. Yeah, definitely.
Because there's a lot to do. And just quickly, before we have about 4 or 5 minutes, we should probably talk about a couple practical things that we can do to protect our kids, just in general.
Yes, please.
Okay? And one thing that in Terror of Demons, if you haven't bought it, check it out. I talk about this in the there you go, in the chapter on media. It's not enough if you have we have Apple TV. So our oldest child is turning 5 in October, and we have 4 kids, and we're expecting our 5th. It's wonderful. But they're just at the point now where I'm like, okay, they can actually go to the TV and turn it on and like press buttons and things and turn on the DVD player and stuff. So my wife and I said, you know what, we don't have cable, but we have the Apple TV to go YouTube and iTunes shows that we've bought, whatever. We're getting rid of the Apple TV. Why? Because I'm sitting there going, you know what? My kid could walk in and he could press buttons and go to TV show, like just kind of button mash and click around. And all of a sudden he's going to be seeing, because these thumbnail images of these shows, they're not explicit because obviously they have their obscenity rules and things, but they're just crazy anyway. They're scary, they're sexualized, whatever. So we're getting rid of that. So you got to figure out a way to really guard your media. I suggest getting a Chromecast, because it's just a little stick you put in your TV and you just play that from your devices. So if your kids don't have your devices, they can't play this stuff. There's no remote, there's no built-in hard drive, whatever. We bought a DVD VHS player. You can find them at flea markets and things. And you go down to Goodwill or whatever, and you can get all the movies and things. And you know that like you can vet them. We know which ones are fine, and we just buy those. They're like $1. And we have tons of them. And Beatrix Potter, all these old shows and things. Yeah, wonderful things. See, but my biggest thing right now, I think the most important thing that you have to do to protect your kids is really guarding the media that is coming into your home. And if you give your kids a device with Wi-Fi access and there are no strict parental controls on that, congratulations, you have just given your kids a loaded revolver with bullets tipped, mortal sin tipped bullets and pointed it at their head. Do not do that. If you have to have electronic devices in your home, have your computer in the kitchen. Don't let them, or have it in the office or whatever. Have them use a laptop in the living room with you or whatever, okay? Do not give them devices to go in their rooms with. I don't care if it's just an iPod Touch and he's little. It doesn't matter. If they can receive images through the internet, someone at some point will send them something that will tempt them towards mortal sin.
Yes.
That's my big.
Yeah, big thing. This is again a whole nother show. It's such a huge topic, needs to be addressed. Yeah. I think just as much as possible, keeping the children maintaining their normal life, whatever is normal for you before the lockdown, doing whatever you can in your power to continue that same normality with your children, so that because that's what they need really to feel safe and to continue to develop as children into men and women. They just need to have that normal ordered routine, which allows them to simply learn and develop as is their right. Another thing we always talk about is the duty of a man to provide for his wife so that his wife can be a full-time mother. Yeah. Doesn't mean she can't work in the home if needed, but a woman has the right to be a mother. Yeah. And that's also what's best for the children, to have a full-time mother, especially if the father can't work in the home either. I'm blessed because my day job, I can work at home. They actually forced us to work at home, which is great. I prefer that anyways. So I get to work at home, so I get to be with my children physically at least. So that's great. But yes, that very important thing. And it's difficult in our time, but men, it's your duty. Do what's necessary. Get another job, get an extra job, whatever, find a side hustle, get more money so that
And
your wife,
sacrifice.
sacrifice. You need, this is something that our fathers were willing to do. Our fathers did this. They sacrificed because they knew it was their duty. So our duty as men is to defend the weak from evil men, particularly our children, also our wives. And this is something that we need to be up in arms about, sometimes literally, in this situation that we're in, because our children are under attack. Who's going to defend them?
Yeah.
Any final comments, Kennedy?
Yeah, just prepare for the next lockdown. I was talking to one of our priests the other day, and they're very good priests. Anyway, I said, what are we going to do, Father, if they shut things down again? And he said, listen, Kennedy, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. We know how this thing works. We know a lot of it's smoke and mirrors. We know a lot of it's, posturing. Oh, we're going to do this. And you kind of look back now to the first parts of it, and you're like, I could have done that the whole time. Just, you know how things are going to be. Whatever your situation is, you know how the lockdown works. So start organizing with other families to have good relationships for your kids, etc. You know how things are going to be, and you know what you can do and what you can't do. So just work within those, be prudent, but work within those and give your kids as much normalcy as possible, so that they can have a life. And especially in the, there's an old expression, America sneezes and we catch a cold, like you guys are going to have a crazy next 50 days. And with this judge going in, and they're going to try to push probably Barrett through or someone else, it's going to be insane. It's going to be insane, and it's going to be interesting to watch. And so a lot of people are going to have to protect their homes, and there's going to be whatever. So find a way to protect your kids from this stuff and give them a childhood, just give them a childhood.
Yes, there will be blood in the streets. It's it's already happened. It's going to be worse as the election gets closer. So we need to be very cognizant of this reality and understand, look at your city, look at your municipality. What is your governor saying? Or what is your mayor saying? What is the chief of your police saying? Are they on the side of the Marxists, or are they on the side of basic law and order, whether you're right or left? Just basic law and order, just basic normalcy of putting down rioters. What kind of men or women are they? So understanding your landscape, understanding the threats, because if your chief of police and your mayor are soft, BLM is going to come to town and destroy your city, and your child's not going to be able to go to the park or whatever. So be like the example of Corleone. Thank you. I can't pronounce it in Idaho, where BLM showed up and they were greeted by 1,000 citizens with rifles who said, "Turn back or we fire." So BLM got back in their bus and they left. That's exactly what you need to do in your city. And this is absolutely justified, because you know what BLM is going to do. You know what Antifa is going to do. You've seen it across the news. You've seen it on Twitter. You know what they're going to do. They're going to come and destroy your community. So you need to defend your community for the sake of your wife and children.
And word of a wise, just one last thing. Word of a wise for all the left-wing agitators. Okay. You need to read about Spain in the 1930s, because here's the thing. Yes, these left-wing agitators, they're really good at destroying things, but they're not a military, and they're not organized in that sense of the word. And they can break things, but they can't build things. And you don't want the reaction from the conservatives. You don't want the Coeur d'Alene is just a small example of a small, relatively medium-sized town where a bunch of guys with, some of them had rifles that were sort of like more protection things, but a lot of them just had hunting guns and things. You don't want the reaction of organized, conscientious, well-trained marksmen reacting against you. You don't want that, because it's not going to be good for anybody. So these left-wing agitators, just stop, because the reaction that's going to come, look at Spain when Franco came through, and the Republicanos, and they were perverts, and they were destroying the country, and socialists and all that. And it was a disaster for the left. Like, the thing was over within a period of weeks, more or less. And it was a destruction, because you're going to have a militaristic response from people that are conscientious and organized. And you don't want that.
Yeah, and most of the right conservatives are just as godless as the left. They're not pious Christians. They're not going to show mercy. They're not going to use their weapons for justice like we're advocating here with Catholic men. We are the minority. I mean, these Catholic men with white weapons who are actually going to use them for peace and justice. We're the minority. The rest of the right is godless. They're going to use their weapons for they're just going to use them without mercy.
It's going to be a total war.
With total, yeah. So you need to understand what you're up against. They don't understand because they don't believe in reality. But that is the problem. That is the reaction that is coming. All you need is a couple of conservative men with weapons. There's many of them, and they've already been coming out here and there.
Up here and there.
And this is the situation that's going to break out into at least localized civil wars.
Yeah.
As soon as the conservative men stand up, which they're already standing up, and we're going to see this reaction, and Catholic men need to be prepared for that because we are not on the side of the godless right. We are not on their side.
No, they're not the alt-right or whatever.
They are godless.
Yeah.
But we are going to stand with them in some sense because we do believe in law and order. We do believe in this. So it's a difficult balance that we need to distance ourselves from the godless, but also understand that the Marxists are really the main enemy that we need to put down. You know, the conservative, godless, Republican, whatever alt-right guy who's just, minding his own business. I have no quarrel with him.
Yeah.
So this is the reaction that we need to be prepared for. It's coming. It's already here. You must be prepared, men of God. So let's offer up an Our Father, trusting in God's mercy and with confidence. Stand up, men of God. It's your time. This is your time. In nomine Patris et Filii Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Pater noster qui es in caelis, sanctificetur nomen tuum, adveniat regnum tuum, fiat voluntas tua sicut in cielo et in terra.
Panem nostrum quotidianum da nobis hodie, et dimitti nobis debita nostra, sicut et nos dimittimus debitoribus nostris, et ne nos inducas in tentationem, sed libera nos a malo. Amen.
In nomine Patris et Filii